Hey everybody, it's Haitch, and welcome to the very first installment of Dune Pod, your one-stop shop to get ready for the new Dune movie. This week, I'm joined as always by my co-host Jason.
Anytime there's like, we're gonna do 3 pages of world building, but it's all through like an elvish song, I'm like, that's a wrap.
And by special guest and poet, Protolexus.
My first introduction to the Dune universe was my parents gave me Frank Herbert's prequel series for Christmas one year.
We begin this series with part 1 of our discussion of Frank Herbert's seminal 1965 novel, Dune. In the weeks and months ahead, we'll cover Herbert's books, as well as the movies directed by Denis Villeneuve, including Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival. We'll also cover the films featuring key cast members Timothée Chalamet, Oscar Isaac, Zendaya, Josh Brolin, and much, much more. So fasten your still suits and join us for the journey. Enjoy. Why don't we just, jump into it? I mean, the first question is why a Dune podcast?
Yeah, why not? Why can't there should be so many more? There's a lot of interest in Dune right now because the Villeneuve movie is coming out in December. But also, I think there's a lot of perennial interest in Dune because it's a seminal work of science fiction that also has sort of these unknown and sometimes unseen cultural resonances.
It's pretty wild just kind of rereading it to see how many references have been made to it from so many different works.
Dune is such an amazing universe with so many different stories that you could tell with just all the different sects and, different players in it and all this history worked into it. Which is cool to note also is that they are working on a TV series as well, or at least a miniseries. Is that on HBO? I can't remember.
HBO Max. Ever heard of it?
Oh,
yeah, because
yeah. Like why be precious about it too? Because obviously, like Frank Herbert wasn't very precious about it after the initial trilogy. It kind of became like, all right, I guess people are into this. Let's keep writing stuff. And then then like his kid is like, great, like I'm going to write stuff too. It is something that there isn't a canonical representation of it outside of the book. And the fan base of Dune is also kind of I don't know. I assume there are Dune cons, but like I've never been tempted to go to like a Dune con or whatever.
So, Jason, where did you first get involved? Like, what was your first introduction into Dune? How did you get started on it?
I'm pretty sure it's the Lynch movie. Like, I think as a kid, I saw the Lynch movie on like, Saturday afternoon television or something like that. I definitely didn't see it in the theater. I don't remember ever not knowing the Lynch movie. Like, it's one of those things where it just kind of predates my conscious memory of understanding movies and culture. Like at some point I saw, one of these versions of the Lynch movie on television. And we had a pretty extensive, VCR operation in our house where we were just taping things off of TV. And one of the things that stood out to me about the Lynch movie was that there are these different versions of the Lynch movie. And at some point I realized pretty early that I was seeing a different movie than when I'd go back to revisit it. And I was like, wait, there's something else. This scene wasn't even in here, or this came later, or, this just didn't happen. And that was so fascinating to me as a kid. I was like, how can there be different versions of them? That had never happened. And that really, I think, is what drove me to the book. I was like, okay, well, if I got to like figure out what's going on here, then I'm going to have to go to the source material and read the book. And so I read the book sometime in junior high school to kind of like establish canonically what the story was. And then found out that some of the stuff that I loved from the Lynch movie wasn't even in the book. So it was this like constant unfolding of the story and my understanding of it as time went on.
Nice. Proto, how about you? I remember we got into this, I think, earlier this year, right? This was your first time reading Dune?
No, actually, I had read Dune before in my teen years, but my first introduction to the Dune universe was my parents gave me Frank Herbert's prequel series for Christmas one year, and I read those before reading the original Dune. Yeah. So reading Dune, I know a lot of people say it can be dense, it's hard to get into, there's a lot of names, blah, blah, blah. But I never had that experience because all of the characters in that you meet in Dune, they kind of get their backstory from the prequel. So I was already familiar with that universe, or just even some of the names. I don't know if you guys read the prequels, but it's a lot about Leto when he's younger and Jessica's mother and Jessica growing up. So it fills in all those stories. So going into reading Dune, I felt very comfortable. And then with our recent reading, though, is my first time that I've gone past the first book.
Yeah, so I discovered the books, like a lot of things my older brother Reed introduced me to, comics, U2, REM. He turned me on to Dune when I was 13. So this was the summer of 83. And I took a trip from Florida out to California, and I got Dune maybe like at a B. Dalton or something, and then got on the airplane. And I just remember reading it the whole time and while I was in California, and just completely being blown away by this book and sucked into it. Something about Paul having this just incredible control of his body, his mind, and this idea of this perfection that he represented, and this goodness that was the seed that really resonated for me at the time. And then, of course, I saw Dune in the theater in 84 with Lynch, and I had no idea what to really make of it. It was way over my head in terms of some of the darker themes that he was going for. But I always remember they had a translation sheet with all the glossary terms that they handed out to you with your ticket. It was that complex. Yeah. So anyways, I definitely came to it at an early age, and I had read Dune and Messiah and Children of Dune multiple times. But never got all the way through until this year. Proto and I started a read through, so that was definitely a good experience to crank through that. You referenced the Dune movie coming out, like seeing these pictures of whether it's Chalamet walking on the beach or Stilgar, or just the beards in this movie are just off the hook.
Yeah, they definitely were anticipating the coronavirus beard wave by giving everyone a really lush setup. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's really exciting because Villeneuve is such a great filmmaker. I'm a big fan of his Blade Runner remake, and then the Chalamet photo I thought looked dope. I thought that looked really, really good. The cast is ridiculous for a genre film. I mean, and a genre film that's like an or genre film, like is just, like obviously it's not, you cannot disguise that this is anything but like a really, really weird science fiction movie. And they got, a complete A-name list of folks. But, in general, I'm wildly optimistic, and I've set my expectations impossibly high.
Yeah. I mean, after seeing what he's done previously, I have very high hopes for this movie. I think this is the one, right? This is where they're actually going to get it right. And it is amazing that they're going to do it in two parts. What is your guess for where they would break the movie up into two? To me, it seems like the natural break point might be when Paul and Jessica are in the desert and like the movie cut to credits right there.
That's a good question. I mean, I think, certainly there's a lot of shots of some of the Fremen, and so I think they're going to have to get at least partway into that story. But I think they will expand out some of the initial machinations, like the raid on Giedi Prime that was in the books but not covered. Like that would be a really cool thing to be able to see. And you can imagine taking a little bit more room in that first film. I was just completely shocked that they did not film the whole thing and then just chop it into two parts. Like the notion that they're going to go get everybody and go back out into the desert and
that's stressful.
It is.
Yeah, that's stressful. That's what's going to screw us, is that the first part's going to be amazing, and then it's going to be 1,000 years until part two because, the pandemic.
It never happens.
I assume, it will be like the second Jodorowsky's Dune. Jodorowsky's Dune Part 2.
Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah, I would probably cut it at the Jessica takes the water of life scene, which is, I think, the end of part 2 in the book. Mm-hmm. It's like where... like Paul's like fully got his like mentat awareness. He's prescient. He's got like, all that stuff. He's not yet like, he hasn't taken the water of life, obviously. And he's not like become a sand rider either. And then part 2, I would have like the opening be, he becomes a sand rider. Like he rides the worm because like, why not? Why wouldn't you start there? And then I think that also helps explain a little bit why you don't have Fade in part 1, but then you also, hopefully that means you can do more of like the Fade stuff in part 2 and just introduce him as a primary antagonist.
I love Fade in the book.
Not seeing him in the cast list, I was like, what's the deal? Is he cut out of this movie? And that seemed like a strange choice.
Yeah, because one of the best scenes, I don't actually remember if it's in the miniseries, but like one of the best scenes in the book is Fade's gladiator fight against the captured Atreides from that failed Giedi Prime raid. And that's like, that scene's amazing. It has like everything good in it that isn't an Atreides. It's got Fade, it's got the Baron, it's got Bene Gesserit witchcraft, it's got, the Count Fenrig, Lady Fenrig. It's a chock-a-block scene.
Fade is running his own mission. The Baron has his own thing going. Thufir's got a plot going on in the background. Like, it's super intricate. It's so good.
Yeah. No, I think it would just make total sense to like save that as like a part 2 like showpiece of like his intro. It's like the first scene you see in Fade is he's like suiting up to like do battle on his gladiatorial, his 100th match, right, in the arena, and that's like his intro. And you're like, who is this, badass? Because like it establishes like for the end that this is someone who like is an actual threat, which I don't think like even like like you never really believe Sting is like a credible threat in the Lynch movie.
But it's a good look. It's a good look in the space cod piece, like
he looks
listening.
Great. He looks great. He did a lot of dehydration, a lot of tantric exercise, but it just doesn't seem plausible that he's going to beat the Kwisatz Haderach in a thumb match, let alone a knife fight.
Yeah, with Fade's fight, I love that has a great bit about just the poisons, and poison is such a big element in this story. And I feel like in the Lynch movie, it doesn't really hit on that as much. So having that, and then also it's just a foreshadowing of his fight with Paul as well. So having 2 fights with Fade would be cool to see on screen for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and the Jameis fight, right? So like definitely the gladiatorial aspect of combat is huge. And having Paul, even before the Jameis fight, having prescient memories of, or seeing himself dead from knife wounds, so that it works multiple times through the story is really fantastic. Proto, are you comfortable giving us just a brief synopsis of the book? And then for today's episode, we're just going to cover, we'll walk through the first book, which is about the first 40% of the book here.
I think you should do it. You probably have something ready to go.
I'm not ready. It's going to be you or Jason. It's definitely not me.
Jason, we need you.
Sure, I'll spitball it. Like, it's funny. I guess the thing to say about the plot of the book is one of the recurring motifs in the story is this notion of plan within plans. Like, this is a phrase that pops up in a lot of ways in different variants. Plans within plans or feints within feints. It is true that because of the unfamiliarity of the terrain, the story of Dune has it has the appearance of being complex. But in reality, the actual nuts and bolts of the story are quite simple. And I think it's worth just sort of laying it out, just so we have the background.
Hot take, Dune is real simple.
Dune is real simple. The story is essentially Hamlet plus Lawrence of Arabia. A boy's father is killed, and he needs to avenge his father. And to do so, he is in exile and enlists the help of a indigenous or native population to the place, the hostile environment in which he finds himself. Like that's pretty much it. One of the reasons the story works is that it obeys, basic Joseph Campbellian rules. Like you've got the hero who needs to go on a journey, and that journey is started with the death of his father. He finds out that he is special because he goes away. Like it's very kind of, stuff that it's the same stuff that we see in Star Wars or, it's the reason why all of the great stories work. The book consists of 3 parts. And part 1, the Atreides family, which is Paul, his father, the Duke, and the royal concubine, Jessica, his mother, have been given control of the planet Arrakis. And the planet Arrakis is special in the known universe because it is the only source of the spice melange, which is a spice that extends life and extends consciousness. And this spice not only grants longer life, but is the key to allowing orbital flight. It's what allows the Spacing Guild to navigate between star systems because they can see the path that they're trying to take. And so it is the ultimate currency and commodity in the realm. And the entire universal economy is based around the mining and selling and access to the spice. And so the former house that ran planet Arrakis is the Harkonnens. The Harkonnens are the nemesis of the Atreides. And when the Atreides family takes possession of Arrakis, they know that they are walking into a trap. They know that they are being given this planet and this responsibility of mining the spice because the Emperor believes that they are too powerful and that they are going to have a trap laid for them, which will result in the destruction of their house. But because the spice is so important, they think there's no choice but to go and take the planet anyway and try to defuse the trap. And so part one of the book is basically, we know we're walking into a trap. We think we can avoid it. Spoiler, we do not avoid the trap.
One thing I love about it from a sort of storytelling perspective, it creates unbelievable tension to tell you right out of the gate, these guys are in trouble. They actually have the scene with Baron where he lays out the entire plan and describes exactly how it's going to work. You know who's going to be doing the betraying, and you know why the plan will work because it's seemingly impossible in what their expectations are. So I thought that was like a really effective technique to take the reader and just immediately make you very uncomfortable and nervous for what's going to happen.
And it's kind of amazing there because like you kind of think from the beginning that the Duke Leto, Paul's father, is this great military leader. He's kind of set up to be this great man who commands the respect of his troops. And there's a lot of talk about how good he is at his job as a sort of a ruler. And how he knows he's walking into a trap, but like the first step in avoiding a trap is to know you're walking into it. And he's gonna see right through this. And he just gets totally worked within like 150 pages of the book. Like he convinces himself that he's being betrayed by the wrong person. He doesn't actually realize how nefarious the plot is against him. And by the close of the first section of the book, he's been betrayed by one of his household. The Harkonnens have retaken Arrakis, and the mother of his child and his son Paul are now in exile in the desert. So that all happens in part one.
So, Proto, what did you think?
When I read this for the first time, I was all in. There's a lot of just nuance to the writing that gives it a sense of being set in a real world that I really appreciate, which is hard to do. That might not be throughout all the themes, but I don't think you have to do it to make it work everywhere because he is so good at making like a culture seem real and a world seem real. The way he talks about Arrakis is just so believable, I guess because of his background as well, just in ecology. But then also what he gets into with religion and designing the Bene Gesserit is amazing to me. And it feels real.
Yeah, and you kind of have this effortless introductions of concepts of like to say that the Bene Gesserit had been working for thousands of years to breed Kwisatz Haderach automatically gives you this very long, drawn out view of the world and the galaxy and the political system that is in play.
I love that. I also love just on that point about like the Bene Gesserit have been working on this for 90 generations. I do love the way that Herbert establishes the sense of scale of what he's dealing with just off the jump. Like in the movie, the Lynch movie, like the first line is like, a beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year. And I forget what the year is, but the year is like a 5-digit year.
A beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 10,191. The known universe is ruled by the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, my father.
And so just from like the first line of the movie, you're like, what are we talking about here? And so it just immediately establishes the scale of, fantastical, like, well, what's happened in the last 35,000 years? A lot's happened. We can't get into it right now. Like,
yeah. The Gom Jabbar, as a kid reading that, it just really kind of grabbed my imagination, right? You've got Gaius Helen, who is super intense, and like death is immediately in the air if Paul makes, one tiny move. The even concept, trying to understand the notion of, are you a human or are you an animal? And are you able to have sort of a consciousness that can understand consequence and making the right decision for the long term as opposed to the short term? Couple of things. One is that Gaius Helen confirms essentially that Paul is a truthsayer. I had not picked that up before. The book really supercharges all of Paul's powers, whether it's being a truthsayer, being a mentat, or being the Kwisatz Haderach. Like all three of those things are true and powerful. So that was one thing. And then the other, Paul keeps referring through the book time and time again, this notion of of being infected with purpose. And having that be triggered by Helen, and then gets like in his conversations with his father, he feels it. Or when Yui gives him the OC Bible, he keeps having these moments where he just feels it just building on and on and on, that he is kind of swept in this current and being carried along to some extent.
That touches on two of the main things I love about the book on a thematic level. One is this notion of crisis and the importance of crisis to the human consciousness, which I think is like where you get into some of the more Zen Buddhist ideas that are in the book. Tim O'Reilly, founder of O'Reilly Publishing, wrote a book about Frank Herbert that has like really good insights about his work overall, but also a lot on Dune. And a quote from Tim that I like on this concept of crisis is, one of his central ideas is that the human consciousness exists on and by virtue of a dangerous edge of crisis, and that the most essential human strength is the ability to dance on that edge. The more man confronts the dangers of the unknown, the more conscious he becomes. And that Gom Jabbar scene at the beginning is really just out of the gate how Herbert is establishing that idea. I think the line in the book is something like, our test is crisis and observation, and Paul says, I see the truth in it. That is this notion that this, like, not just the Gom Jabbar, but Arrakis as a planet is going to create a crucial test for people. And in that moment of crisis, something new is going to be revealed. So it's a fun way into a classic trope, which is there's a special boy who has special powers. The other thing that I like from the start of just the jump of the book, we talk about in this conversation generally, like world building in science fiction. What do we mean by world building? Well, Tolkien's concept of world building in Lord of the Rings was to do it based on language. Like, he started by coming up with the languages that everyone spoke, and then he created the stories that explained how those languages evolved. The world building in A Song of Ice and Fire is really one of genre subversion. It was like, well, what if the person you think is the hero just isn't a hero? And what if everyone just kind of sucks? Is sort of where Game of Thrones went with it. Dune, the seed of that world building, is this quote from Herbert that superheroes are a catastrophe. And Herbert also said of his project in Dune, like, it is the systems themselves as I see as dangerous. Systematic is a deadly word. So it's this idea that he wants to interrogate what it means for people to believe in systems and order and institutional structures, which of course is a very seductive theme for a 13-year-old boy reading this book. But it also is a fun leaping off point for building a world.
I love the whole scene with Thufir giving Paul a hard time for sitting with his back to the door, and him saying, that he knows him by his footsteps, and that could be faked. That idea of Thufir as the master assassin, in addition to being this mental genius, but then just everything with the shields, training with Gurney, giving him a hard time about not being in the mood for it. Like, all of that interaction as you're introduced to Gurney, Duncan, even Yui, there's a lot of really nice subtlety and connection between these folks. And you can tell the loyalty between the family. It's more than just a service. These people are a family.
Right.
Yeah, I had more of that Paul's terrible purpose stirring in the midst of getting the OC Bible, and again, a nice world building moment there of like, you're like, wait, what Bible? Is that the one that we know? Do you guys know where the quotes that are in there, are any of those actually in the Bible? Like, they sounded kind of like familiar, but different.
In one of the books, he does give an explanation of how the OC Bible came about. Isn't that like a footnote in one of the later books?
It must be, because there's an entire Wikipedia page about it.
Okay. There is a portion where they explain the OC Bible and all of the different religious heads meeting together to kind of come to some kind of conclusion. And then there's like a revolt against that book coming out. Just amazing ideas.
The fact that like his overall approach with religion is just to blend like two different things, whether that's like Islam and Buddhism, or, Christianity and some other thing. They're basically, I think I looked this up, and like in the history of like the Dune universe, like Hinduism ended up getting merged with Catholicism at some point or something like that. It's just like it all just got like blended together. And so, but yeah, it's another layer though too of how religions control and how religions are systems, and like systems are one of the things that like Herbert's like trying to interrogate in the novel. I mean, I think the best way in which he does this is with the Missionara Protectiva, which is like the Bene Gesserit's like religious arm that goes onto different planets and like centuries before establishes a religious tradition that's like just in case, like, you know, you show up here on, like someone shows up here on this planet 100 years later, there'll be like a mythological framework which you'll understand, you can perform a miracle, and you'll be seen as like, you know, a holy person, an important person in these people's religious framework. Like that's like just a really cool, you know, notion in the book of just like using systems as means of control and exploitation. Not that that's a good thing, but it's a good theme.
I love that concept, right? So they had to have at least some sort of planning. I wonder how they chose what planets they went to and where they implanted things. But that concept of hundreds of years in advance, having things all kind of queued up. So I referenced this briefly before, but to me, this was really amazing. This notion that Paul is a mentat and that Leto is the one who tells him that. And I guess it becomes a more specific awareness for Paul through the process of that. But he said that he'd been trained by Thufir and Jessica for that, but they don't say whose idea it was. Was it Leto's idea? Was it Jessica's idea? Like, why has Paul been trained as a mentat?
Yeah, I thought that was it's funny because you sort of clued me into that as like a key moment. And so when I was rereading it, I was really surprised at how much like that is an important concept in the first book. And that like right before they leave for Arrakis, his father's like, by the way, we've been giving you the secret mentat training. Are you cool with that? And he agrees to continue forward. And like it sets up this dynamic where Paul's like awakening into his superpowers is basically this two-step where he first becomes aware of his mentat powers and then becomes aware of his powers as the Kwisatz Haderach. So it's this weird, like, kind of dual classing, like where he basically ends up as like, you know, a wizard assassin or something. But like so much of the power, I had forgotten, like so much of the power that he has happens well before he does the water of life stuff. Yeah, like he was already a pretty serious dude before, but he didn't really need it. Basically, he got OP with the waters of life. And
then on top of that, isn't his mother giving him the Bene Gesserit training as well?
He's got it all. Yeah, he's just like all the things. Yeah,
multi-class, but without taking any penalties. He's
no penalties.
Like full progression across all classes.
Yeah. And it's also like kind of, then it's sort of like begs the question of like, no one saw a problem with this. Like no one, like, you know, his mother didn't anticipate any problems with this. Thufir didn't anticipate. No one anticipated any problems with like, you know, just moving every slider to 9.
But it also does feel precarious, right? Like there are elements where he is not fully in control. He's getting knocked out and captured and, sliding in the sand and figuring out what's going on. So it does seem like they found a way to create some balance, but certainly he has a lot of power.
It also establishes like one of the central themes of the book, which is what the book is saying about leadership and like heroism. Like the book establishes these heroic archetypes, both in Duke Leto at first and then later in Paul, and seduces the reader into believing like, oh, these are heroic figures that are true leaders, and they do have heroic qualities. But one of the points of the book is that heroes are a great liability because they innately draw people in and force them to kind of subjugate their will to the will of the leader. And that like there's this inherent effect that happens that leaders, no matter how well intentioned, end up corrupting systems and building in systems that corrupt other people. And Leto's story is the kind of the seed of that, because he's set up as this great leader, but is in fact like very fallible, and his weaknesses are what lead to his ruin.
The Baron is so much more interesting in the book. He's like really intricate and thoughtful and laying out these plans. He's a total psycho and comprehensively evil. But I just love that idea of him working the plans really well.
The Emperor does wish to audit your books.
Anytime.
You have no objections?
None. My Chom Company directorship will bear the closest scrutiny.
And he thought, let him bring a false accusation against me and have it exposed. I shall stand there, Promethean, saying, behold me, I am wronged. Then let him bring any other accusation against me, even a true one. The great houses will not believe a second attack from an accuser once proved wrong.
yeah, in general, the Harkonnens are pretty badass. Like, I mean, like they're very like formidable enemies. And yeah, the Baron definitely has a plan, and it pretty much, I mean, it basically would have worked if he hadn't run into the Kwisatz Haderach. He would have had everything he wanted.
Yeah, and it gives a nice foil to the Atreides, where the Atreides family is built on loyalty, and the Harkonnens pretty much run everything based on terror and fear.
Yeah, and treachery.
One thing that's so clear in the writing, and that's kind of jarring, and I could see some people not liking it, is how everyone is super sensitive to the emotions and facial features and movements of everyone else as they're communicating. They're trying to read the smallest details. This person, their breath quickened for a moment. That must mean this and that.
A pulse at their temple.
Yeah, there's like such a hyper awareness of everything around them for a lot of characters because they have like these amazing abilities. And it really affects how the writing of the book comes about, and just hearing the thoughts of the characters. There's a lot of this throughout the book of just what they're feeling and what they're seeing from other people. How do you guys feel about that? Do you enjoy that? Did you find that kind of ever like abrasive at all, or is it just?
I like one of my it's one of the reasons why I love the gladiator scene on Kidi Prime, where Fade fights, and you've got Lady Fenrig and Count Fenrig, and like their conversation is entirely nonverbal. Like they're using it's described as they have like a private humming language between them. But there's lots of just like he observes her, observing him, and like there's lots of internal dialogue throughout that, and I think it makes it a really crackling scene. So that part I like. The parts that like worked less well for me are where they try to do a lot of stuff in like song or stories or like verse or something like that. Like for some reason, like I always like kind of go blank. Then that's like why Lord of the Rings doesn't really work for me.
Who
is she? This woman you sing of?
'Tis Lay of Luthien, the elf maiden who gave her love to Beren, a mortal.
Anytime there's like, we're going to do 3 pages of world building, but it's all through like an elvish, song. I'm like, that's a rap. Like, I'm not going to read like 87 stanzas of the song of whoever. Like, come on.
Luthien and Beren or whatever.
No, I'm out. all I know about that is it's got the same cadence as a Childish Gambino song.
It's called My Favorite Song by Childish Gambino and Chance the Rapper. And the second verse starts with bang, 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 skeet, skeet, skeet. She do that thing for 3 retweets. The album feel like 92. So grab that ball for he 3-peats. Chance on acid, cruising on that LSD. I asked Joseph about my deal. Turned and said, hell yeah, let's eat. Okay, so that rhythm right there, that was just like a worm in my brain. I couldn't stop listening to that song, and there was something about the rhythm of that second verse. But you can just go, Yarindil was a mariner who tarried in Arvernian, who built a ship of Timberfeld and Nimberfeld, a sailor, and it's the same rhythm scheme.
Oh, nice. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to me, Lady Fenring and Fenring being in the books, not in the movie, or at least not in Lynch's movie, but so Lady Fenring, once they get to Arrakis, Lady Fenring leaves a note for Jessica in the nursery with all the plants and trees that are growing, and basically warns her and says that they are not working for the Harkonnens. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they sort of, I don't know if that was part of a feint within a feint that the Emperor is planting seeds or trying to kind of destabilize things somehow, but that was an interesting idea.
It's interesting, like that kind of brings up the question of like how loyalty works in this universe, because like no one ever seems fully loyal. Like there's loyalties like Gurney Halleck's loyalty to the Atreides family seems pretty unbreakable in this book. But
in this book,
yeah, exactly.
Gets more complicated later.
Yeah, but like that's sort of my point. Is like no one's ever, you can never really fully count on like Lady Fenrig left this nose, like you're in trouble, like keep your head on a swivel. But like they didn't really do themselves any, they didn't really do the Atreides any favors, like up until the very end. Like everyone's always kind of playing both sides in this and waiting to see what happens. And like, even like the relationship between Jessica and Leto is like not uncomplicated in terms of the loyalties there. And there's obviously the fake plot to make it seem like Leto suspects Jessica. But he kind of also does suspect Jessica. He kind of also does have these questions about what she's doing on behalf of the Bene Gesserit or whatever else, So it's definitely, no one's 100%.
The reference to Leto's buyers selecting Jessica.
Yeah.
And the notion that, it's hidden from her and from everyone else that she's actually a Harkonnen, the daughter of the Baron himself. I had completely forgotten that. So I thought that was kind of a fascinating idea, combined with the notion that Leto would just keep his options open. Hey, you're my concubine. Maybe I'll marry somebody else to cement a political alliance later, but you're the one I really love, baby. It's all good. But he did love her.
He did, but this is where you get into like the fairly, on the negative side, like I think the feminist critique of Dune as a book is pretty sharp. In that, like, the women characters, like whether it's Chani or Jessica, do not really have agency unto themselves outside of their relationship to the men that they're supporting. For Jessica, that's both the Duke and her son, and for Chani, that's her father and then Paul. And so like they're powerful women in the sense of like, physically powerful. They have superpowers, they can do things, but they don't have the same choices that Paul does. And part of that is obviously just the universe that Herbert's constructed, which, we can fault him for, but also it's like just sort of how he's decided to imbue the men, whether it's the Emperor or the Baron or the Duke or Paul, as like the ultimate like deciders or, shapers of fate within these systems. And like, obviously the fact that the goal of the Bene Gesserit breeding system has been to produce the male Kwisatz Haderach because women are unable to look within the yin energy that is inside is complicated. Like, doesn't seem on its face great. And so, yeah, I think those parts of the books like kind of haven't aged super great.
They definitely have like a classical role for most of the females in this, where it's like, yeah, the men are the leaders, and then the women are there and they can whisper in their ear and influence them, but out in the forefront, they're not as powerful. Even the High Reverend Mother, Truthsayer, sits at the hand of the Emperor.
Right.
I have found myself throughout the process of the books coming into alignment with the goals of the Bene Gesserit, and then coming out and then coming back and trying to test my loyalties of who I'm following up with and supporting on that. I don't know. I'll take the slightly contrarian view. Like, I loved Jessica. I thought she was incredibly powerful. I always felt like she was, whether it's making the decision to create the Kwisatz Haderach in the first place or just her interactions with everybody, I thought were incredibly powerful. I was just rereading the section where in book 2, where she takes out Stilgar.
Jessica's motion started as a slumping, deceptive feint to the ground. It was the obvious thing for a weak outworlder to do, and the obvious slows an opponent's reactions. It takes an instant to interpret a known thing when that thing is exposed as something unknown. She shifted as she saw his right shoulder drop to bring a weapon within the folds of his robe to bear on her new position. A turn, a slash of her arm, a whirling of mingled robes, and she was against the rocks with the man helpless in front of her. "Get back, you worm-headed lice! She'll break my neck if you come near!" A voice out of the basin said. "The boy got away still. What are we? Of course he got away, you sand-brained... Ugh! Easy, woman!" Stilgar's
like basically begging her, everybody, "Woman, release me!" Like she's completely taken him out. I also love Caitlin in Game of Thrones. I always thought that she was like an incredibly powerful woman who was out as well doing her thing. But I definitely get it. There is that tension, that inherent tension of she's sort of also swept along. And there's actually a moment in book 2 where Paul literally says, "I realize my mother is my enemy."
Yeah. I think one of the best Jessica moments is after Paul kills Jameis, she realizes that like she's got to like take Paul down a peg because he's killed someone for the first time, and she can't like, she's like, "Oh shit, like I created this like super killing machine. I can't like just let him loose onto the world. I gotta like, like needle him a bit." And so she goes up to him, and the first thing she says is like, "How does it feel to be a killer?" And she like, uses the voice on him or whatever make it sting extra bad. I like that. I thought that was like, I think that's like a good Jessica moment where she like, kind of
asserts herself.
Asserts herself. But like even like the decision to bear a male Atreides heir instead of a female she was ordered, she did because she loved Leto. Like that was like, that's the stated reasoning for her to do it. It's like, again, it was something she did because the man she loved wanted it. It wasn't like her own kind of like, as opposed to like Catelyn Stark in Game of Thrones, who starts the war by apprehending Tyrion. Like she goes rogue and she's just like, I don't care what the rules are. Like this man, I believe, killed or tried to kill my son, and I'm going to do something about it. Like that's like a different type of thing.
Totally.
Two questions I've always had in this book that I don't think are answered is one, what was the Bene Gesserit's plan with the eventual breeding program? Yeah, like say they get him, the Kwisatz Haderach, they breed him. What happens next? And then also, why did it work that Paul became the Kwisatz Haderach when it's supposed to be like needing another generation? I don't think that's ever really explained, is it?
I think the point about what were they going to do when they won, I think is a really good one. And I think like they didn't have a good plan. I think they didn't have a good plan about what they were going to do when they won. But I want to get back to that point in a second and talk about the why was it Paul? Because there's an interesting thing that's in I think it's again the Tim O'Reilly book about how Herbert was inspired by the Asimov Foundation series, which is the first book in the Asimov Foundation series is by far the book I've tried to read the most and failed at for like 43 years of life or whatever. Like it's just like I can't make it through for some reason. It just doesn't work for me.
Did you read it, Proto? Have you read that one?
No, I've never read it.
Okay. So it's great.
It is a seminal work of science fiction that I have never read. But the story is that like basically mankind is on the precipice of a really bad like kind of extinction event. And there's a scientist who has done the calculations and knows like we're in trouble, but has also like found a way out of it by not a way out of it, but shortening the time and the darkness. The dark age that is to come from 10,000 years to 1,000 years by creating a storehouse of all human knowledge called the Foundation, and it will allow society to rebuild much quicker than it would otherwise. The problem is that this brilliantly calculated, very precise analytical model is good for general populations, for the population writ large, but has a weakness, which is it can't predict mutation or the unexpected. And the unexpected happens. This person called the Mule arises and throws apart all and kind of ruins all the good plans. Herbert read that, and the Mule is the villain in that sense, right? In the Foundation story. Herbert read that and was like, well, what if the Mule is the hero? What if the mutation is the thing that challenges like the analytical, well thought out, systemic plan, and that's the thing that like I want to celebrate and be like, yeah, mess it all up. And so and that the reason, I mean, that's the story reason why Paul is the Kwisatz Haderach is that he just because she decided to have a boy instead of a girl, and because they gave him the Mentat training and all these other environmental factors, like the Kwisatz Haderach arrived a generation early instead of it being the baby that Fade, Rautha Harkonnen, and Paulette Atreides would have had. It's Paul. And because he was the unexpected thing, it destroys all of the systems that were put in place to take advantage of that.
Yeah. Also, maybe having the Messiah during the midst of a giant political crisis is not the best idea. So continue to move through here. So all of the Atreides, they pack up from Caladan, this lush, water-filled planet, just all of the descriptions of going up into the guild ship and the size of the guild ship, the commerce and the cost of moving equipment and getting things done. They pack everything up. They show up at Arrakis, and all of the scenes of them sort of getting set, getting established, trying to figure out where they're going to be, what the rooms are going to be like. And then, as you said, Leto has a lot of ideas about what is coming, right? And so I love the Leto staff meeting. I want to see like what their Slack channel looks like for as they're coming up with topics and resolving things. But he directly says that, Sardaukar are going to be there in Harkonnen gear. It's going to be battle. It's going to be open, and is totally ready for it.
Yeah, I also love that scene of the meeting with Leto and his advisors, because you could say like, well, where does world building happen in a book? And you can't point to one specific place where it happens. It's all, it's the sum of the parts. And that is a part that I remember reading and being like, wow, this is so great at just making it believable that he's a leader, that he has men who they're responsible for, and that they're now on this planet and they have a plan, and there's all these systems in place. And there's some like technical talk in there too, that like just adds a layer to it that just makes it feel so real.
Mm.
There's sort of the mirror image of that scene too, which is like the dinner party scene where they invite like sort of the muckety muck of Arakeen society to dinner at the house. And Leto does not do particularly well in that scene. Like he basically like ends up like kind of being distracted. He has to leave to go deal with some stuff. He's not a gracious host. And that's a really good scene, though, because it has a lot of what, Proto, you were talking about earlier, which is like the interior monologue stuff. There's a lot of like Jessica realizing that one of the guests is actually a Harkonnen spy based on like how he pronounces his words or whatever. And then like there's like some, Paul figuring that out as like with a hand signal from Jessica. And like there's like all of this like very like subtle communication stuff happening at a nonverbal layer. And Paul like putting himself in a position to like, play up his like, just sort of like do the right thing with the important people at the dinner and like put down the guy who sucks. And like, it's a pretty good scene.
Yeah. And Jessica totally does tear that guy down. She gets him to the point where it's like, is there going to be open violence or something? And then he is forced to back down. I think Kynes steps in to kind of set it straight. There is a moment, I don't remember where it happens, but there's a reference to somebody who's some people who are Harkonnen kind of loyalists, they believe. And Leto is just like, take everything they have, turn their families out into the street, just no mercy whatsoever. And to me, that was an interesting seed of like, whoa, this guy is willing to be ruthless and tear people down.
Yeah, and they say, and like Gurney like praises him for that and says like, it's like a move reminiscent of the old Duke, like his Leto's father. And it's like, okay, it's like these guys are just assholes too. Like, there's like that's like that subversive, like there are no heroes. The book seduces you into believing that you know who the heroes are, but actually Leto is not a hero. And then you think Paul is the hero. And Paul's big struggle is he knows that if he succeeds, he'll start this jihad that burns down the galaxy. And he succeeds and starts a jihad that burns down the galaxy. Like, it does not, like none of the people that you believe are the real heroes are truly heroic.
Yeah. Except maybe for Liet Kynes, right? So we have Liet who's introduced in the book, Leto meets him. He takes them into the desert to go look at spice production, which is the first exposure to kind of the mechanics of what's happening, and also the first introduction to a sandworm. And that whole scene is really great. Just the notion of Paul already knowing how his still suit's supposed to be worn. He's wearing it in desert fashion. The notion of Liet, who's expecting treachery or haughty, lack of concern, really has a begrudging respect for the Duke and for Paul. Proto, do you wear your boots in desert fashion generally, or how do you?
Well, I mean, I think the idea of Arrakis being a desert, it just creates so many poetic moments in this book, but then also I would say much more in the books to come, God Emperor and the Children of Dune.
No, I think that's right. I like all of the greening of the desert stuff that comes later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this part is really the introduction to all of that. And the way Herbert builds it is really amazing. And then how it's so well intertwined with the culture of the Fremen in just amazing ways, with the sayings that they have.
The Fremen are the people who live in the deserts of Arrakis. They are not indigenous to Arrakis. They are a race of nomadic people who've lived on many planets and now live on Arrakis. Like, this is where you get into some of the like religious / racial approbation of the book, or like theories of the book. But like the main idea there is that they're what's referred to as Zen Sunni wanderers, who are some combination of like a Bedouin tribe and a Native American Buddhist group that live off the desert, are very efficient at surviving, and are ruthless fighters, are some of the best fighters in the galaxy.
I just love, that's introduced with Liet Kynes, and of just how they speak and how they refer to anything, and how the desert informs really every aspect of their life.
Yeah, I think that part is definitely powerful. And Liet is a great example of somebody who was brought there and then raised there and then sort of went native. That's your part of the, sort of like the prophet. I just love Leto's reactions through that entire scene. The notion that the spotting bonus he gives to the guys that are working the crawler, and then when the shit hits the fan and they have to choose between getting the men out and getting the spice out, that he doesn't hesitate. There's no question for him.
Kynes returned to the working frequency, and a voice blasted from the speaker. Almost a full load of spice. We have almost a full load. We can't leave that for a damned worm. Over. Damn the spice, the Duke barked. He grabbed back the microphone, said, "We can always get more spice. There are seats in our ships for all but 3 of you. Draw straws or decide any way you like who's to go. But you're going, and that's an order." He slammed the microphone back into Kynes' hands, muttered, "Sorry," as Kynes shook an injured finger.
So I think that is a moment of really establishing there are truly noble and good purposes inside the Atreides.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, like, obviously those scenes are good. There's some comment in there about how someone remarks is like, oh, like, it's amazing how quickly the Atreides do this, like establish this bond with like new people. I think it's maybe a Jessica aside. Yep. And there's like sort of a dual judgment in that too, though. It's like, yes, like it is a positive character trait, but like it's also like a means of command and control that, like, is what sort of allows them to have the station that they have. Like one of the concepts, one of the things that's with Liet in particular, like, just to argue against this further, is there's a lot about like people getting salty when Liet doesn't use the right titles. Mm-hmm. Like when Liet doesn't address people as sire, like first with Leto, Gurney is like, you will address him as sire or my lord. And like he doesn't do it, and like it's a whole thing. And then later, when Leto's dead and they're on the run, and Paul's like meeting him now as the Duke and is trying to form this alliance with Liet, an alliance that he's successful in forging, and they pledge their lives to each other. There's another thing in which like Paul is like, you will call me sire, like you're gonna use my right name, and like there's a reason to that. That's not just like I want you to use my right title, but there's something double-edged in that too.
Yeah, for sure. There's they're trying to get established. You have this threat of risk that is hanging over you the whole time. Finally, we get to the chapter that opens. Leto is like exhausted. He's been going for days on energy pills. He hasn't slept. He's really stressed out. And he sees a crumpled form in the hallway that is a dead body. And you just know in that moment, there's just a sinking feeling that it started and it's going to get bad. And it does get bad, right? He is immediately, incapacitated by Yui, who then gives him the tooth to execute his execution scene. It is interesting, the idea of all the trust is based on the imperial conditioning of this, this process for treating doctors that is impossible to break except for when it gets broken. So that's a little bit of a, it's a bit of a
head fake. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a bit of a like, don't worry about, we've definitely established you don't need to worry about this guy. He's the traitor.
Yeah. And from Herbert, that's kind of an interesting idea as well, because there's a lot of loyalty in this book. We've kind of been hitting on that. And so this guy he's supposed to be loyal based on conditioning that's unbreakable. And here it's broken. That sets off this whole story, really. So right. any loyalty that's based on fear, love, duty, it's all up for grabs. Like anybody could go at any moment.
Leto has his, final facing with the Baron. And then of course, Leto tries to kill the Baron and kills Piter instead.
There's a funny thing in there too, which is when they're trying to get rid of Paul and Jessica, they don't just kill them. They like fly them out to the desert to leave them there to be taken by the worms. And there's this like complicated thing where it's like basically the reason they're doing that is so that they can withstand questioning by the Emperor's truthsayer. And so that, you know, if they're asked like, hey, did you kill these people? They can say, no, I didn't kill them. And like, they'll be able to get off with it.
Well, I leave now. Oh, this is much better. Much better. You understand, Lady Jessica? I had no rancor toward you. It's a necessity. Much better this way. And I've not actually ordered you destroyed. When it's asked of me what happened to you, I can shrug it off in all truth.
It's not exactly clear that that's a foolproof criminal strategy because, yes, you'd be able to answer truthfully to did you kill them, but you would not be able to answer truthfully to, like, do you have any knowledge about how they died?
Did you hire someone to kill them?
You know,
yeah.
Right. It like literally doesn't, like, as long as like the Emperor's truthsayer has only one question, it works great. So that's a funny part too. But Piter is another great kind of character that's just thrown in there, the twisted mentat of like the idea of, again, like there's this system of creating mentats that seems amazing. You create these human computers that have superpowers, but then it creates this flaw where they become susceptible to exploit, basically. I mean, it's basically like someone hacked a computer, but the computer is a human.
So the Paul and Jessica are on the run. They're able to get their way out, and again, I love that scene of Paul. You know, can he get the voice together, and then just enough that he can get Jessica, and the notion of Jessica, you know, her approach to dealing with those guys and using the voice isn't just take off my things and let me go.
Jessica twisted her neck, spat out the gag. She pitched her voice in low, intimate tones.
Gentlemen, no need to fight over me.
At the same time, she writhed sinuously for Kinette's benefit. She saw them grow tense, knowing that in this instant they were convinced of the need to fight over her. Their disagreement required no other reason. In their minds, they were fighting over her. She held her face high in the instrument glow to be sure Kinette would read her lips.
You mustn't disagree.
You know, it's like, hey, you know, we don't have to argue. You know, it's going to be okay. And she's just sort of seducing them in the midst of doing it until she can get exactly what she wants. I love that subtle power there. So on the run, they see an ornithopter coming, and they're wondering whether it's going to be, you know, Harkonnens. It turns out to be Duncan. But it is interesting that is the moment where Paul, you know, both his mentat awareness and then also the Kwisatz Haderach, that is the first shot where he has prescient awareness, starting to think about past, future, possible deaths. This is all coming in just like in the midst of that intense exposure of those moments. So I'm kind of curious how they, you know, or how Herbert decided to do that in that instance and how he made it work.
I think, again, it's like the idea, the theme of crisis. Like Paul's in now a flight or fight for his life situation. And so he's in this ultimate crucible, and it's awakening something within him. There's also the biophysical explanation, which is that he's had this infusion of spice food because there's spice in the food that they've been eating, and like now he's out in the desert where there's more spice, and there's just some kind of accumulation of this psychoactive substance. I'm actually reading now Frank Herbert's book, the Santa Rogen Barrier, which is another story he's told. That's based in like contemporary times. It's based in California, but again is at its center. It's got this notion of someone subtly being poisoned/drugged by their environment, and through that process, awakening to some higher level of consciousness. And so that just seems to be like a thing that Herbert he's really thinking a lot about. What if you just ate something and your brain woke up? Seemed to be a theme that he was into in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That was what you were saying, Proto. I think that was one of your favorite scenes in the book, right? He and Jessica end up basically sitting up that night.
Yeah, I love all the parts with Paul awakening and realizing his power. I think it's so well done, and it slowly builds and builds throughout that part of the book. I just ate it up. If I were to set out to write a story, you know, about how somebody can see into the future and what that would look like, the fact that he was able to do it and construct it this way, it's so compelling as you read it. I just love that part of the book.
Yeah, and so it is interesting. Paul specifically says that he is not the Kwisatz Haderach. He says he's something
else.
Yeah, something more than that, something unexpected, and that he does see that the jihad is what the Bene Gesserit. He says that's what the Bene Gesserit really want, and that he sees the wild jihad as the thing that renews humanity.
Right,
and that's like it's this thing is executing at a race level, race consciousness level, and it's the thing that's needed in order to renew the race. Which I don't know. It's an interesting concept for sure, and it definitely has similarities to the Golden Path discussion that comes later on. And that is, that final scene closes out book one. Other thoughts or comments on book one? Other things that we didn't hit.
Oh, book one it's a really action packed. Like book one really has a lot. It's like about as dense as a story as you'll find. Like book two kind of like spreads out. It's a lot more kind of wandering time. And then book three is, like to the climax. But yeah, book one just establishes so much so quickly that it really leaves your head spinning. Like each chapter is just like, it's just gangbusters. It's a real triumph, I think.
Yeah. I loved it. I could totally see how this is going to work really well, like that jam packed and you can see, 30, 40 minutes on Caladan and going on as in the movie version. And certainly it was a real thrill rereading this book one. It has not left it has not lost a step in the intervening years. The notion this book was written in the late 60s, but still hits so hard and has a very real contemporary feel, super powerful.
Yeah, and if you're not grabbed after book one, this is probably not the work of fiction for you. Like there's not gonna be a gear that's gonna come in later that you're like, okay, like this is it pretty much lays out the whole project very quickly, very little frills.
Right.
And so yeah, if it doesn't grab you, that's cool. Move on to something else. But I think it's what I think makes it a classic from the jump.
Unless you're like, I love this world building and what I want is like less action and more sort of like people talking and like thinking about what the other person's thinking. Like that really caught me.
Yeah. More Balicet numbers from Gurney.
That's right. Exactly. Awesome. Well, coming up next time, we'll look at probably do book 2 and 3 together. I think those two will work well and flow in and we can finish bringing this on. The vision that we've talked about for this podcast would be tackling a broad range of things that are the Dune and Dune adjacent. So looking at the books, for sure, the Herbert books, looking at Lynch's movie, looking at Jodorowsky's Dune, looking at the comics, video games, board games, and of course, preparing for, everything in December with Villeneuve. So it might be watching Arrival or watching 2049 or Call Me By Your Name, getting some Timothée Chalamet up in here. There's a lot of good stuff that we can get into. And that's it for the very first episode of Dune Pod. Thanks again to Jason and Protolexus for joining me. Next week, we'll return with part 2 of our discussion of Dune, including interpreting the water of life, awesome showdowns, and the religious underpinnings of the book. Dune Pod is a production of Haitch Industries, a member of the Paper Keg Radio Syndicate. The episode was produced and edited by me, Haitch. Our artwork is by Catcher, and our theme music was composed by Toby Forsman of Whipsong Music. Thanks for listening. We'll see everybody next week.